Welcome back. We'll finish with levels and then get on with the curves. Now the levels didn't require a lot of work because the histogram was almost there because of the shadow and highlight and unsharp mask layers that we did early in the workflow. The only adjustments we needed to do were onto these individual channels, the red, green, and blue, to offset any problems with the temperature and tint from Camera Raw, because in Camera Raw we were more concerned about minimizing clipping, even at the expense of the image being a little off temperature-wise. So this is why you fix that within here. And just remember, the red and blue are equivalent to temperature, and the green channel is equivalent to tint. In the RGB channel, you just use the center slider to make any brightness adjustments, and because of the interconnectedness of the curves, levels, and hue and saturation, you might find yourself coming back to this from time to time to make small adjustments. Well, I like what we got, so we'll close it for now and open up the curves. Now, as you remember, we used that unsharp mask to put a certain amount of contrast in our image, but we left a little bit for the curves to pick up. The two of them together work real nice to get your contrast right. If you try to do it all with the unsharp mask, you'll see those halos around things. So we kind of let this curves pick up part of the load. Now, the curves dialog is not hard to understand if you just keep in mind that the lower left are the darks and the top right are the lights. We nail down our center point, which would be 50% gray, and if we put a point here and send it south, we're asking everything from 50% gray to get darker. But as we get closer to black, it's unaffected. So with the bow and the curve, you can see that our midtones are the least affected. Right here it's affected the most, and then it tapers on until it's the same and hasn't been affected. And that point being stuck there prevents clipping. Now the problem, as you remember in Camera Raw, and the reason we kept that curve set to linear, is here I can actually increase the contrast with no clipping. See up in the histogram up here? But in Camera Raw, if you put much curve in there, you start to introduce clipping. So anyway, let me drag these points away, and now visually we'll just get this thing put a little more contrast. Notice how the image appears to be more saturated in color. Now visually I like that, but we've got our hue and saturation adjustment layer down here that can do this with much more fine-tuning. I don't want any additional saturation being introduced with the curves, so you can avoid that by setting the blending mode of curves to luminosity. Now watch the saturation drop when I click this. There you go. So if you keep your blending mode set to luminosity, it allows you to keep everything compartmentalized and just use the curves to only affect the contrast. So let's do that right now. So you can visually just drag it. You can put a point up here and drag it north, but in my experience I've found that because of the way that the shadow and highlight in an unsharp mask processes the image early on, that about all you'll wind up doing in this curves is putting one point about here and dragging it south a little bit just until you get a little bit more contrast. If you need a little more pop in the lights, well, you could bring that up a little bit. But you can see by the time you notice much going on, it's starting to look a little messed up. So experiment around with it, but I think you'll find that just a little dip in the curve here is about all it'll take. If you really want to push your darks dark, you can put one more point kind of down here, send it a little farther south. Let's zoom in on here so you can see what's going on. Let's get here and bring this, there's some darks here. Let's bring this curve up and let's get things dark. And if you take, these would be even darker areas. If you want to send it south a little bit, they'll get slightly darker. But I think you'll find something about that will do it, be sufficient. And there's our image so far. In the next segment, we'll deal with the hue and saturation.